Hello, can you hear me? No? Can you hear me now? No. Oh, you can hear me now. Okay, good evening, everyone. I am your moderator tonight, and are you ready for an insightful discussion?
Yes.
Awesome. So joining me on the stage are our panelists. So I want to bring up and please welcome Lotte, Dula, who you saw in the video. Professor of Black Studies and History at Amherst College. Michele Miller, Reparation at Amherst. And last but not least, Jallicia Jolly, Assistant Professor in American Studies and Black Studies at Amherst College. Put your mic on, so let's test it real quick.
Check.
Okay, can you hear you? How about you, Lotte? Okay, no.
We needed my glasses.
There you go, yes. And Dr. Jolly, okay, you got it? Awesome. Well, first, earlier today, before I go into the questions, you had the Jack and Jill teams ask you some questions, right? How many of you helped answer those questions? Like, oh, good, I see some hands. So I'm gonna read some of the comments that were made. So one of them was, using one word, what do you think is the biggest misconception about reparations? Someone said new, bad, undeserved, mute, money, tangible. And so this is very interesting. I wanted to ask, starting with Dr. Jolly and Briayna Cuffie, what is the biggest misconception about reparations?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for coming out. Nicole, thank you for organizing this, and thank you for this question. So the first thing I would say is the question around accountability and responsibility. I have to hear both as a student when I was attending Dula, but also as an educator myself, and as you saw in the news reports. A lot of the discourse is around, well, why should we have to pay for something that we weren't a part of? Like, we didn't bring in the national farm. That was, great-great-grandfather prevented. Like, that's not on us. And I think what happens is that discourse brings this idea that in order to be responsible, one, it isn't just a responsibility. It brings this idea that folks are not responsible in rectifying the injustices. So I think that's the first misconception. And that logic also denies the ways that folks are complicit, and families, generations of white families are complicit in the mass accumulation of wealth, right? And importantly, I think that assumption and misconception doesn't get to this idea of how the theft of land, labor, and life happens over time, not just in slavery, as we mentioned, but also through the various processes of dispossessing black families across generations. So I would say that's one of the main misconceptions, and we can think about this in the category of like rich slavery, how that's passed on, right? The enslavers always, children of the enslavers can always be able to enslave. Children of the enslaved are always going to be enslaved. And so by that category alone, it really exposes how the legacy of wealth unfolds over time. But in our contemporary moment, there's a sort of active denial of addressing that complicity. So I think that's one of the misconceptions, not understanding how that unfolds across time to shape the material conditions of our contemporary moment.
Thank you, Dr. Jolly. Briayna, how would you answer that question?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see me, or does it matter?
Yes, we see you.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
They're clapping for you. Hope we can hear that.
I would say for me, and specifically to how Lotte and I go about it, I think for me the greatest misconception is that it has to be just straight cash, straight money, only from the federal government. a lot of what Lotte and I have done, and just interpersonally, but also with other people, so much of it is around information and resources, whether those are people, resources, items, or information. Sometimes I don't necessarily need the cash. I need a connection to get me in the door. I know how to get to it. I just need to get in the door. And so I would say the misconception is that I would have, my focus is heavily on that, and that there's other ways. One of the t-shirts I wear frequently is, how do you want your reparations? And my answer is always, I want it in every way possible. I want legislation, I want money, I want resources, I want connections, I want it all. And so to keep it short, I would say that's the answer for me.
Thank you so much, Briayna. And Michele, I would like to ask you, what inspired you to dedicate yourself to this work? Some might say that you should not be the one to lead a reparations committee. So what advice would you give people who also want to make an impact but are hesitant for various reasons?
I was inspired, like many folks, after the murder of Mr. George Floyd, and I knew that I wanted to do something that would lead to deep and lasting change. But at the time, I didn't know a lot about reparations. And one of the first things I learned was that a foundational tenet of reparations is that the harmed individual or the harmed group decides what the reparations look like. And so for me, as a white person, how was I going to pursue this work of reparations? And so I, having been conditioned in a society that upholds white supremacy, I was going to need to do a couple things. One of them was going to be to look at how I understood power and how I used my power. And the other was I was going to need to develop genuine relationships with the Black people in my community. So that meant leaving my white bubble. I was raised in a majority white community. I hadn't had a lot of experience interacting with Black people. And so I was going to need to leave my white bubble and perhaps leave some people behind even, in order to really understand what the Black people in my community meant when we were talking about reparations, so that I could then use my social and political power in my predominantly white community to influence the leaders in my community, to influence my community, the community members. And so all of that was going to mean a lot of work and reflection on my part. And this would be a daily reflection, daily inquiry into my own internalized racism, into the ways that I understand power. It was going to mean deep listening. And what I found is, if you're engaged in a reparative process, that's all built in. So as white people, we're often afraid to be courageous. Our need to preserve ourselves comes before our desire to make repair and do what's right and right the wrongs of our history. And so I would just say that when you're engaging in reparations, you're engaging in individual reparations as well. And so if you make a mistake, you can forgive yourself. You can acknowledge it and you can forgive yourself. You can say, I'm sorry. And so those are the kinds of things that have helped me in this process. Thank you for the question.
Michele. Now moving into talking about the repair work, Lotte and Briayna, I'm going to start with you, Lotte, and Briayna, you could chime in. In the film, we see you discuss your organization called Reparation for Slavery, which is a portal for white families walking in the path of racial healing through engaging in directed repair. Why was it important to create this portal focusing on white families? And how many families have utilized this portal? And can you share briefly some examples of its impact?
I'll start and then I'll pivot to Bree. And I like to tell it like it is. So we're the perps. We created the system, and specifically my ancestors have been here, many of them, for 400 years. And we created some of the very laws. Like 3 years into my journey with Bree, we discovered that one of my ancestors created the laws of slavery in the province of Maryland. That means Bree and I are connected through slavery. That's in year 3 of our working together. Now, my background is very similar to Michelle's. I lived in a white bubble until I was 57 years old. And you saw me walking down the stairs there, and I make a discovery, and it changes my life forever. Now, I'm the sort of person who would have argued, saying, oh, this is BS. I'd be sitting in this audience right now just kind of rolling my eyes. And I'm here to tell you, even somebody I identified as a fiscal conservative for all those years, and within 24 hours, my life had totally changed. If that can happen for someone like me, it can happen for any of you out there. You can wake up, discover the history we learned in our textbooks. It's not just incomplete, it's wrong. That's right.
It is wrong. And there is a debt to be paid. Now, I started 5 years ago, and we've gotten a fair amount of work done. If you've been to the portal, reparationsforslavery.com, it's a portal. We invite both black and white people to look at this. I mean, all of us suffer the same. The history in the textbooks is wrong. Everybody has a wrong idea of our history. And so we begin to unwind that harm by engaging in direct repair. And for me, part of that repair, my mother belonged to United Daughters of the Confederacy. What do? They put up those monuments you saw, one coming down. They also rewrite our textbooks. So for me, an example of direct repair is to build a portal that tells the truth about our heritage. So that's why we offer this to white families, because there's nothing for white families that basically says, come hither and I'll show you what it looks like to tell the truth. I mean, I don't look at ease in this film. I say embarrassing things. I'm an awkward person. Bree and I are also extreme introverts, by the way. It's hard for us to be up here, but we do it because this is really, really important work. So, and could you repeat the last question, because it's important?
The last question was,
one.
how many have been utilized? How many utilize the portal?
I'm going to pivot to Bree. You talk about that.
I don't know that we have a true scale of how many families and people have used our site, but I can definitely give a couple of examples of some of the interactions we've had with people. I will say that some people that have done the courses with us, or that came to do the courses with us through finding the website, have taken it in directions we never thought of. So we had someone who really reconstructed the entire board of his organization. We had someone that used their investments in cryptocurrency to transfer wealth. We've had people do some work around repatriating documents, so learning how to properly transcribe them, preserve them, and giving them, documents written by or orated by their ancestors who weren't able to read and write. Give them to the descendants, 3 and 4 generations separated from the descendants, so they can see, the words at least their ancestors spoke, if not wrote, that are decently preserved. Be able to put handwriting or a name or address to someone they know in their family tree or are trying to piece together. And so people have taken it in all sorts of directions. I just had a call with someone yesterday or 2 people rather yesterday. They've got 20 people across 4 generations of their family that are invested in trying to figure out how they can make reparations to the descendants of the 2 people that their ancestor enslaved. And so extensively talking about, what they have to offer, what the options are, how to go about tracing the lines forward. And so the impact is multi-generational. It's across socioeconomic status. So not every white person that we have done work with or spoken to has that the trickle down wealth, but they got resources. They know someone who knows someone, and so even just opening that door of like an option is to also pass along that information, those resources to other people. And then I wanted to speak to the importance of creating the importance of creating a portal for white families. I will add to what Lotte said about how it's set up. One of my main role, I'd say, when it comes to the site, when it comes to the portal, is also finding ways to make it helpful for brown and black people specifically. So the phrasing or what is available or the source it comes from or what have you is very much informed by that, because one of the things is when I talk to black folks about the site is, okay, so there's nothing on it for me. Oh, no, there's information to weaponize for you. People will absolutely try to say the information is not out there, and our site is absolutely a repository that proves otherwise. The library, just of books, even Google going by age, explaining things to kids in elementary school versus high school. A lot of times people will say the information isn't out there, but it absolutely is, and we try our best to consolidate it all in one place.
Thank you so much. Now, speaking about information, Dr. Bradley, in your USA Today article, you mentioned that institutions have received incalculable benefits, not only because of slavery, but also because of their adherence to Jim Crow policies and de facto racial segregation. The impacts can be felt in multiple ways and policies, student athletes, the artifacts of the enslaved, and the list goes on. So Dr. Bradley, when taking all of that into account, I want to ask you, if racism has touched everything, how do you go about starting the discussion about what is fair, what is owed, and what reparations look like?
Yeah. Thank you for the easy question. Shout out to Yemisi, Calvin Hill, and whoever gave us microphones and a chicken dinner. Thank you all very much for this. Most especially, thank you all for being here tonight. The kind of people that would come on 2 days' notice to a discussion on reparations are my kind of people, and I'm trying to be with you forever. So thank you. So if you're wanting to know how should we approach this, one of the main things we have to do is, when it comes to reparations, the United States acts as if, and oftentimes we treat the United States as if it's an immature child, as if the United States doesn't know better, as if the institutions don't know better. They of course know better. And so with that in mind, we have to call these institutions to task. These are all very kindly people who have been doing this work, and much respect to Michele, to Lotte, to Briayna, Amakar Chavez out in the audience, so many others doing this work. But what has to happen is, first of all, acknowledgement. And I think that's the hardest part. Because what ends up happening, if you acknowledge it, that means you know you have to do something about it. And so when we're talking about these institutions, the kind of institutions that I study, you saw at Georgetown University. That's a good step. But so many other institutions of higher education want to do it the immature child kind of way. That is, I want to tell you, we've researched that our institution, sadly, had slaves involved in the construction of the institution or in the operation of the institution. And we just wanted to report out. Look here. Look here. That's navel gazing. That's not helpful. That's patting yourself on the back for feeling sorry for what you did. And that's not helpful. We need to be strong enough, we need to be mature enough to be able to say to these institutions that you owe something for that. And then they will say silly things, all kinds of silly things. Like, we don't know how much money that would be. You got economists at these institutions of higher education. But then there'll be an element that will also say silly things like, well, we don't want to issue out handouts. If somebody came and plumbed new toilets all through Springfield College, and then came to you after they finished, you wouldn't see the check as a handout to that plumber. Don't you ever think that it's okay to talk to me or my daughter, my beautiful Peanut, or my family as though you're giving me something. No, Jack, you owe me. I'm sorry, I done took too much time on this. But institutions of higher education know better, and I say this, I'm going out to Virginia tomorrow to commemorate the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education at a symposium. I mention all of this because UVA turned away black people. Virginia Tech turned away black people. Those are life chances. Everybody knows that if you go to college, you make more money than people who don't go to college. And so you owe those people money whom you turned away. You could say that all around here. By the way, Boston owes people money for how it did those kids when it was time to bus schools, bus other schools. You give some people some triple deckers or something. I don't know what it's.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. Yes, he deserves a clap for that. And so Dr. Bradley spoke about equity. And so I'm going to go into you, Dr. Jolly, right now. You are the founder and director of Briayna, the Black Feminist Reproductive Justice, Equity, and HIV/AIDS Activism Collective. That's a lot of words. Okay. And the primary goal of which is to combat a range of reproductive violences across structural, state, and scientific domains. Could you share with us the ways in which your work in reproductive justice intersects with reparations?
Absolutely, and just hearing you say that, it's quite an ambitious goal, but I think it's so crucial because we don't often put reproduction or reproductive justice in conversation with reparations. But what many of us do know is that Black women's reproduction and our literal bodies, our reproductive and productive labor, has been a crucial wealth building strategy of this country, right? Yeah. And through our forced breeding and our sexual subordination at the hands of slave masters, it literally built this entire nation. Its material resources, its current conditions, well, the conditions are trash, but in terms of its material accumulation of wealth, it's literally built the social world, its institutions. And so I think part of what reproductive justice is doing is saying, let's first acknowledge that, let's first name that, and let's make that actionable across various spaces. In healthcare, but certainly beyond it. And I just want to do some demystifying reproductive justice. But first off, let me hit up the organizations that are doing immense work around this in the state and beyond. That's Birth Equity Justice Massachusetts, that's the Neighborhood Birth Center in Boston, that's the Women of Color Health Equity Coalition based right here in Springfield. And beyond Massachusetts, it's also in Atlanta, Sister Song, which defines reproductive justice as a human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and to parent those children we have in safe and sustainable communities. And it was literally co-developed by Black women in 1994, so it's celebrating its 30th year of the term, because they were at a conference with predominantly white women at the time when I believe Clinton wasn't president, and they were having these conversations about white women's access to legal abortion and choices. When we know for Indigenous women, for women of color, for Black women especially, for immigrant women, for poor women, choice is a different context when you are in constrained context, right? So they wanted to expand what that means and have a more serious conversation about it. So why reproductive justice in terms of its connection to reparations? So it necessarily extends beyond these individualized focus on like choice and privacy, but to really thinking about how do you have access to the economic means and social protections in order to actually realize those rights. And so knowing that, it makes sense that it's more than simply legal right to abortion, right? It's the right to access to clean water, it's the access to housing, as we were discussing, it's the access to live in safe and sustainable communities with freedom from police brutality, right? It's access to healthcare that doesn't expose you to premature death, right? It's access to, also the basically being able to live in communities, live, birth, work, while being able to do so in ways that allow you to access the basic material resources to sustain your functioning at a basic level. And so when we think about reparations is linked to reproductive justice because it's a way that you can literally enable us to get to a future or a present where reproductive justice is possible. And now that we know that, I wanted to just really name, we were saying their names as we watched the powerful documentary. I want to name Henrietta Lacks, I want to name Fannie Lou Hamer, I want to name a bunch of the Ralph sisters and many other people who were sterilized or who were violated at the hands of healthcare, people who call themselves healthcare workers, that kind of care is violent, but who have been in systems and teaching hospitals, Johns Hopkins included, health institutions who have exploited and medically experimented on Black bodies. That is a site of reparations as well. And I want to note that Henrietta Lacks, a 31-year-old African-American woman who went to go seek access to care for excessive bleeding at Johns Hopkins, and when she entered, they stole her cells and developed the HeLa cells without her consent. And the HeLa cells is important because it's the first immortal line of human cells that to reproduce indefinitely outside of a lab. So, and mind you, the Henrietta Lacks cells were used to make recent COVID vaccines, AIDS and chemotherapy treatment, in vitro fertilization, gene mapping, anti-cancer drugs, and medical discoveries. So there are literally 75,000 publications and cutting-edge scientific discoveries that were built on the back of Henrietta Lacks, and her family was never given reparations and never recognized. In fact, it was just in 2021 when the World Health Organization, with their Black leader, decided to have a commemoration to say her name and honor her life in public, which he faced much white supremacist backlash against. And the Ralph sisters, I have to name them, which was a 12 and 14-year-old Black girl sisters who basically were declared mentally incompetent by an Alabama doctor who then decided to sterilize them and gave their mother a document and forced her to sign it using federal money to pay for the procedures. So when you think about reparations, we have to make the connections to literally the multiple ways that our bodies are violated within these spaces and what that meant for both the accumulation of wealth and for the ways our lives have been undermined. And I think that's where I see the intersection between reproductive justice and reparations. A pathway to achieve reproductive justice requires a reparative justice. It requires reparations.
Reparations, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for calling those names and the impact that their bodies gave to every single one of us in this room.
To this day.
To this day. And so where the next question is about economic impact, economic exclusion, but really focusing on economic inclusion. And so the film discusses Black Americans, the Black tax, right? Which has caused a huge wealth gap, impacting generational wealth building. Why do you think reparations are important in this discussion when we're talking about the generational wealth gap? And so Briayna, you're one of the ones that's going to answer the question, and then also Michele and Lotte.
I'm happy to start. I know one of the things that Lotte and I talk about, and it makes it especially helpful in the situation of me being able to buy my own condo. Reparations is really important. I won't say I'm not the first in my family to own a home, but I'm very confident in saying I'm the first in my family that knows properly how to have, hold, and maintain it. You know, the annual expense of it all, the maintenance of it all. Neither of my parents have ever owned a home. And one of the things that I talk about and I tease out as I talk about parents, grandparents, great-grands, as I tease the thread through is everyone talks about generational wealth, and I do that. Not the opposite, but I can pinpoint my generational debt. I can tease out, you know, the lack of the inability to really save up and pass along wealth, what that has meant for each following generation of trying to help elders stay afloat while also staying afloat as you live your life on your own and grow your own family. And so reparations are a huge part of that conversation. And just me being able to feel solid financially on my own, but have the capacity without going into debt in the future of being able to help my grandfather or an aunt or something, you know, should they fall on hard times, have a nest egg to be able to do that, which none of them have ever been able to do. And the prime example I usually lead to is the one that Lotte and I usually tease out in our presentation in talking about land ownership. I can directly trace, you know, through my maternal line, the lack of land ownership. And then it goes even further with the education piece of teasing out how, you know, my grandmother was the one of 17 children and the only one to go to high school, the only one to finish high school, the only one to go to college, the only one to finish college. And that was huge. And she grew up on a tobacco farm, the same tobacco, that farm that was a plantation that her father, her grandfather, her great-grandfather all tilled. And so reparations is very important too when it comes to the wealth gap. It brings closer to zero, I think is the phrase I used a few years ago when Lotte and I met, just in my bringing up, you know, reparations is also paying off my student loans, it's paying off my credit cards during my little rant when we first met, but reparations is a huge part of that.
Michele, do you want to add, or Lotte? Anything you wanted to add?
I usually take up a lot of bandwidth, so I like to go last so I can pull my own shepherd's hook at the very end. So, I just want to repeat, you know, Briayna and I lecture about the racial wealth gap, and I promised her when we were beginning to do these lectures, if we're lecturing about the racial wealth gap, then it's my responsibility to ensure that your net worth, by the time you turn 40, should be equal to any white person's net worth, at the same age, with the same educational background, and you're almost there soon. Well, she's only 30. She's half my age. So it's really important, and as you see in the film, the through lines of history are embedded in the racial wealth gap. So the only way to bring that to zero is through a federal program of repair. Now, who opposes that? White people. How do you get white people to stop opposing that? Well, number one, in Evanston, after bringing the community together, educating everybody, getting faith communities involved, there was a survey out, I think a few months ago. 70% of people who live in Evanston now support reparations. That includes white people. It is possible. And I'll tell you something else. When you get white people involved in direct repair, even simple things like my working with Bree to put her through finance boot camp 101, one of the conditions of getting a condo is you have to learn to read a reserve analysis report. She now is on her HOA board, by the way, taking over the world. One of the interesting little facts is once you get white people involved in direct repair at the personal and then the community level, if you ask them, what do you feel about a national program of reparations? The answer is, oh, of course. Of course. I've seen it happen. We have a reparations program in Denver. Again, we're starting with personal and community repair. There's not a single person, and we're talking about conservative 80-year-olds walking around with canes. They all will say, I'll say it, reparations are due. I took the class, we did a 40-session, 2-year course. And I focus on people over 50, old people, you know, I got some gray in here. And we're hard. I mean, those of you who are students, you get this in one night, you can go out and start working. Those of us who are a little bit older, it takes us a while to unlearn the conditioning that we've all grown up with. The bootstrap argument, meritocracy, individualism, all these things, all these poisons that we've swallowed whole and believe wholeheartedly. So I just want to encourage everyone to just begin to ask questions about this history. Engage in genealogy. Who were your people? For instance, Jallicia was talking about reproductive health and reparations. I went through all of my ancestries, and the majority of people were either attorneys or legislators or doctors. So the very first thing I thought, the very first idea I had when I thought that, thinking of J. Marion Sims, thinking of all of the people who've created oppression in the name of science and medicine, thinking of all the benefits my Harvard Medical School ancestors, you know, all of that. I thought, I need to help someone go to school to learn medicine. And so that was the first idea I had, was before I got involved in very direct repair, was I could set up a scholarship. And so a young woman, Dr. Alva Powell, who's now an anesthesiologist, doing her residency in New York City, she is involved with trying to change the systems. So even putting a drop into the system, just drops here and there, it expands exponentially. The healing is possible. So I just want to, everyone needs to be working toward repair, everyone. I got, Briayna was mentioning we get communications every week from people who took our 2-year course and said, I got, one guy last week said, I don't know if you even remember me, but I've taken everything you talked about to heart. I got my congregation in Virginia Beach to agree to set aside a reparations fund. We're taking money out of our endowment, and we're endowing students at the local HBCU. And we're going to work with the local black church down the street, and we're going to see what kind of good trouble we can get into together. So whether it's just you, whether it's you and 5 friends, whether it's you in a congregation, the work is possible if we do it together.
Is there anything you could briefly add, Michele? No, please.
I would just add that
In Amherst, we have a $2 million commitment from our town, and we understood from the beginning that that would not come anywhere near what is needed. And we understood that our local effort wasn't a replacement for a federal effort. But what we hope is that people having a direct experience, as Lotte said, with reparations will build momentum towards state and federal efforts.
Thank you so much, Michele. Yes, that deserves a hand clap. Now, Dr. Bradley, and then I have my final question. At GBH, I am the first ever Chief Inclusion and Equity Officer there. Oh, thank you. Hard work. My job is to approach inequities from structurally inclusive models, and in all of your work, right, you've addressed the importance of changing systems, and particularly you talking about systems. One particularly impactful moment for me in the film is when Joseph Stewart said, "Nothing about us without us." So can you share with me, how is it possible to center people while still focusing on the larger system at hand? How have you seen that work well? And what are some missteps that you've seen along the way?
Wonderful, easy question again. Thank you. But that was a very powerful moment. Nothing about us without us. And that has to be the mantra and the beginning and the end of the approach towards reparations. So the part of what I'm saying is the idea that reparations shouldn't go to just those who are looking to go to college. I think oftentimes we do this because it makes us feel better that I believe the children are our future kind of thing. No, it should go to the poorest old people that we can think of. They need to be at the table too. I think some ways the most articulate are those who have managed to navigate these systems in a lot of ways. So missteps that I've seen is calling on eggheads like myself and other people to try to speak for the people who are most in need of reparations and most deserving of reparations, over the years. I think also something that we should keep in mind is the willingness of Black people to do groundwork. So it's wonderful. We see good white accomplices. We don't do allies anymore. We do accomplices because getting freedom for Black people has always been illegal. And so I want somebody who's going to jail with me. I want an accomplice. Right? So it's important that they're there, but in the vanguard of this, we must always celebrate and support those Black people who have been pushing for reparations from the beginning. And I think that is not a small thing in my mind, because people have been doing it thanklessly for a long time. So they talked about Garvey, they talked about Malcolm X mentioned, they talked about so many people, John Conyers, Shirley Lee Jackson, and so many others. Now Cori Bush, that's in the political sphere. But they talk about Ron Daniels. These are organizations that have been around and that have been working without money for a long time. So if we're approaching it, then we start with the people who have been doing these kinds of work for a long time, in addition to whomever else, and we allow Black people to speak for themselves. And treat Black people as though they know what they've experienced over these 300-400 years.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bradley, for that. And I want to get into audience questions, but I have one question to ask all of you. You have to give me one word, right? What does reparations mean to you? Restitution.
Maturity.
Liberation.
Systemic accountability.
That's 2 words.
My bad.
Briayna.
I was ready to say, is it my turn? I can't see. My one word, everything.
Everything. That is everything. Thank you for the panelists tonight. We have some minutes, I can't see, for some questions. So who would like to ask the panelists a question? Yes.
Hi.
Good evening.
Thank you all for coming here. I would like to know, how would reparations look for the many slaves we still have in the U.S. prisons?
Wow, very deep question. Who would like to take that on? You like the hard questions.
No, I think you touched on it in a way that nobody, few people are willing to do. Let's be clear about this. All of these, I was looking at TV, I was seeing all kinds of CBD advertisements, all kinds of THC advertisements, all kinds of betting advertisements. Black people went to jail for all those things. I lived out in California, and they had all sorts of opportunities, business opportunities to open up, I don't know what you call it. Well, we have them now in Massachusetts, too. All kinds of things. That's beautiful. But I'm wondering about the need to expunge the records of people who went to jail for these very things. And the need to provide financial recompense for those people who could not provide for their families when they were away. And so I think that this has to be a thing that we consider if we really want to talk about reparations. So I appreciate you for bringing the point.
I could add something too, just in terms of education, to understand slavery, black codes, Jim Crow laws, convict leasing, slave patrols. Our history, and the carceral system is based on slavery. And none of us know it. I didn't know that until I did a bit of research. If you want to learn the history of all that, we've got a whole section on the criminal injustice system. So understanding how the system works is the first part of things to learning how to repair. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Jolly.
Thank you for that question. And if part of the investment in reparations is creating those enabling conditions where futures of reproductive justice can be possible, I also want to just echo everything Dr. Bradley said and say that it's possible, right? In 2021, we know that the state of California became the first state to give reparations to women who were incarcerated and sterilized. These are primarily Black and Latinx women. Now, it wasn't a lot, but they were sterilized while in custody and after giving birth. And so I think there are ways to create those enabling conditions, and I'm looking forward to being in conversation with you about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jolly.
Yes, hello, my name is Kathleen Anderson. I'm currently the female co-chair of the New England chapter of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. NCOBRA is our acronym. I'm also a member of the Massachusetts Black Reparations Collective. We are organizing and have organized statewide convenings on reparations. Our next one will be in April, the second week in April. And if people here are interested in being on the list or getting information about that, I ask that you email me at kdqanderson@gmail.com. SON kdqanderson@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes. Any other questions in the audience?
Good evening. Thank you for coming and thank you for having me. I'm a veteran and I applied for veteran benefits. I want to know, first, they denied me my benefits because they said my PSTD came before I came into the service.
And they might be right. Yeah.
So what happened was they accepted me into the service like I was. Now they're going to tell me that they can't do anything for me when, along with the racism before I went into service, the Navy was really, really difficult and hard on me in many different ways. And the racism was rampant in 1963. What can I do about that now?
Wow. Does anyone have an answer for that one? That's pretty...
Give it to the guy that likes the easy questions.
Yeah. That's a hard one.
I do think it's a particular situation, but probably not unique. Probably not unique. I think this is something that we should have to take up. I think the mayor of Springfield just declared a day for the cost of inheritance. I think it's important that we bring this to the mayor, to the senator, to the governor. and ask somebody to act on your behalf. First of all, thank you for your service.
Yes,
First,
absolutely.
this is not your point, but I think it might be a wider point. You know, my father was in the Korean War, right? In the Korean War, and this is 1950. And when he got out, he couldn't buy a house in a certain neighborhood because my father happened to be black. Here he was a Purple Heart recipient and couldn't do it. That, for me, as is the case that I'm hearing from you, is a point of reference for reparations. That's what's necessary, and this is important because that's a federal case. We're talking about local cases here. That's a federal case, and so I think this is something that we should ask our representatives and the people who we paid. The last point I'm going to make, I can stay off the microphone after this, is no taxation without representation. And I mean that so seriously that you keep asking us to give you money, and you won't represent us in these kinds of movements and necessary causes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I wanted to add, especially echo on that, a district office, usually not necessarily the DC office, but the district office of a representative is usually the staff and those that handle the, especially Veterans Affairs cases. I know a lot of people jump to calling the office on the Hill, but it's usually the satellite offices that do those. And the least of the offices that I got to work with years ago when I was working on in one of the offices, they take veterans cases especially serious. So anything that's got to do with veteran affairs, they take especially serious and they prioritize. So I would hope that that would be a good avenue for that. So echoing Dr. Bradley there. But the other thing I'm thinking of is, I mean, I'm right by the Naval Academy and I just sponsored midshipmen that are now officers. So my family has for generations, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And if you were enlisted, I'm sure it was even worse. But one of the things I'm thinking of is I know some of the women around here, and I'm sure there's networks of them, but that just take veteran advocacy very seriously. One of the women that I work with does a lot of work for posthumous awards. For veterans, so working with the descendants to get the proper honors, Purple Hearts, etc., that their ancestors were supposed to have received but didn't because of racism. I'm sure there are some up in Massachusetts. I don't know exactly who they are or how to find them. I can ask some folks about the ones that I do know down here about them, but there are pockets of people that basically make it their mission to challenge the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, everyone about rectifying stuff, especially when it comes to benefits, but also headstones, grave sites, and things like that. So there are people like that also exist that can help you do that work and fight them on that as well.
Thank you, Briayna.
How do you see genealogy or ancestry playing a role in reparations? Because our histories were stolen. And Dr. Henry Louis Gates does a good job at finding our roots, but it's not helping me. And I pay ancestry money, and then you get to a certain part, and you can't find out anything else. So how do you see that being a part or playing a role in reparations for Black people?
Bree, do you want to start?
Sure. I love that you knew I already had an answer rolling in my mind. I think that's a huge part of it. It's one of the things we especially lean to with the white folks that don't necessarily have generational wealth, is the research aspect and daylighting information, as we call it, and I'm sure other people call it. Having those public trees, attributing the right information, collating all of the documents, and then also sending them out to one of the pages that we have around reparative genealogy, which is one of the courses that we lead, and I'm sure that Lotte will probably expound on, so I'll keep it brief, is about repatriating some of those documents to where we're talking Black churches or genealogical societies, at the places at the local level, to get them as close as possible to where descendants were, to be able to piece that information and piece trees together. For me, it's a huge part of it. Knowing my ancestors as intimately as I do, there isn't much anybody can tell me about me not deserving anything. And I'm like, oh, no. I have an example for that. I have an ancestor for that. I have a lineage for that. Let's tease it out. Let's talk about it. Which usually ends up with people being silent and feeling awkward about because they talk to the wrong one. I think it's really important to, as Black folks, to really understand as much as possible the through lines of how history has affected us and where our ancestors fit into what we know, what we don't know, and then for white people to be proactive about piecing the gaps, the names, the locations, the enslavers, piecing them all together into something cohesive. So to me, it's kind of a crucial part of it, I guess, is the way for me to answer it. And we always lead people to Ancestry and to making sure things are uploaded, cataloged, and then there are other groups, Facebook groups, genealogical societies, et cetera, that are also places that we can go to try to get some additional context and information on our people too.
I'd like to point out there's a group called Our Black Ancestry, run by genealogist Sharon Morgan. And she is our mentor, colleague, and friend. Briayna and I are amateur genealogists, just like all of you out there, who are obsessed with finding out the truth. If you go, so Our Black Ancestry has a Facebook page. They've got 36,000 people on there, all working to trace their ancestors. And a number of those people are white people who are working to repatriate those documents. So that's how you can find your people. And what I tell white people why this is so important to repatriate is if you can connect up, and if you know what your family has done, those are the first steps of repair that you can follow. Then once you connect with descendants across race, and again, we belong to a group called Coming to the Table, and that's what they specialize in doing, you can begin down the path of reparative healing, and that can include, again, anything from using your agency, using your time, or using your resources toward repair. And it's all about relationship building and then working together, starting with people, through communities, up to our whole country.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. There's one right here. Matt?
Good evening, everybody. Really glad to be able to join the conversation tonight. Like a lot of people probably come to the room wearing a number of hats. I'm a Jack and Jill dad. Shout out Jack and Jill. And also, my day job is with the Community Foundation of Western Massachusetts. And at the foundation, we've been trying to have some difficult conversations around what reparations means in general and what it might mean for us. So we're hosting a community conversation up in Amherst at the end of this month. The question that we're grappling with, I was really, Lotte and Bree, I appreciated the way you framed your interaction as personal partial reparations, is I think how I picked it up from the film. And I've been thinking about it for the foundation. Is it institutional partial reparations? The question for the panel, and maybe Dr. Bradley and Michele Miller, maybe you're off the hook on this one, considering you all will be on our panel in Amherst.
Copycat.
We'll have a chat then.
Okay.
But how does philanthropy fit in this conversation?
That's a great question.
I can begin to answer that. In Denver, we have, through our community foundation, the Denver Foundation, the Denver Reparations Fund. And so we have begun to work, we have Reparation Circle Denver. I'm a founding donor of that. And we're a bunch of white people raising funds. I think we've raised just under $1 million so far in the last just a few years, 3 years maybe. So that's a community level fund. We're not talking about the billions the Jesuits hope to raise. We work with faith communities to raise those funds. And then our partner, Denver Black Reparations Council, they determine how to deploy those funds to benefit the Black community. And what's beautiful is we get our donors matched up with the nonprofits, and people begin working together in the community. So that's what we are trying to create is to expand the notion of what is beloved community. How do we bring people together across race, across class, across every division that we have in our society? So anyway, if you're interested, you can contact me and I can hook you up with the Denver Foundation or with any of our teams, and we can talk about how we've done it, what we did wrong, what we did right, and how that's going. So it is possible. And there are groups all over the country looking at how to convert philanthropy into repair.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for the final question. Thank you for attending a historic night. Please thank another round of applause for our panelists. As we commemorate, really, it was supposed to be on the 13th because of the snow, but the Cost of Inheritance Day, which was February 13th. But I would like to first share the mayoral citation given to Briayna and Lotte. So you have, Briayna, I have yours here, and Lotte, I have yours. And it says, I, Dominic J. Sarno, Mayor of the City of Springfield, do hereby confer upon you this citation in recognition of your incredible contributions to the Cost of Inheritance film. We commend you for sharing your personal narrative and family history and for working together to deepen our understanding of racial injustices and systemic inequities in our county. So thank you so much, Lotte. And Briayna, I have yours. She's gonna take it for you. Thank you for all of your work on this panel. And thank you for making this day special. And I just want to thank the Western Mass in general. This is my home. I've been here 5 years. I moved from Florida. And yeah, I know. But it's been wonderful, and because I moved here, I joined the Greater Springfield, Massachusetts chapter of the Link, so I want to thank them. And then also Western Massachusetts chapter of Jack and Jill of America, I want to thank them for their partnership. I also want to thank the teams that work today, and I just want to thank NEPM, GBH, Chris Hastings, all of you here tonight. But I want to leave you with the words from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He says, we are not makers of history. We are made by history. And so when we watch this film, it's important to understand our shared history and to work together towards making things better, because we cannot do it alone. We can only do it together with accomplices who can go to jail together, like Dr. Bradley said, right? And the whole point is, tonight is about unsilencing history. Don't just leave this space and keep this information to yourself. Truth is the light. So share this film, share this discussion, and let's make change happen together. Thank you for a wonderful night.